Welcome to Hockey Night Online. I'm Monica Platek, and thanks for joining us here today. We're in the final few weeks here of the NHL regular season. That race is really picking up steam. A lot of different teams are playing hungry hockey and definitely desperate hockey. And as you're watching live with us, we really do want you to feel like this is your show. So don't just watch. Get your phone in your hand, on your laptop. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook. You can reach out to me directly. I will be checking in with the Twitter stream and trying to bring some last-minute questions into the conversation. But today, we are so lucky to have Hockey Night in Canada play-by-play man Jim Hughson joining us, and it's my first time having you on the show. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Monica.
So, Jim, we're going to start off with a team that you are very familiar with, of course, following them here in Toronto. The Maple Leafs dropping a 3-2 loss yesterday to the Detroit Red Wings, who obviously wanted to get out of that slump and get some points going, as they may miss the playoffs this season. So they don't want to see that happen, and it really was a desperate game. But let's talk about Randy Carlyle's post-game comments. He said that Reimer was okay, just okay in that game. And a lot of fans are getting down on Carlyle for making that comment. What's your take on it, Jim?
Well, my take is probably threefold, Monica. First of all, Randy's been around Toronto now long enough to know that by making that comment, he would just set the Twitter world afire, and he would certainly have reporters going straight back to James Reimer to see what he thought about it. So he didn't really need to start a melodrama, and that's what I would call it, because it's only a small one. There's a game tonight, and there'll be a new one after that. By just saying Reimer gave us a chance to win, it would have ended the press conference and all would have been fine. But he didn't, because he was in the heat of the battle and asked the question, and he answered it honestly. The second part I would say is that I think Randy was right. James Reimer was just okay. The first goal was a breakaway that he actually stopped and then knocked the puck into his own net. The second one was from an angle that was sort of iffy, probably could have had a piece of it, although let's give Gus Nyquist the benefit of the doubt and say it's a good shot. The third one went through his arm. When the other guy, Jimmy Howard, at the other end of the rink was making so many good saves, James had to stop one, maybe two of those and make a big save. He was just okay. And the third part I would say, when his agent gets involved, as he did on Twitter, suggesting that everyone always blames the goaltenders, if he's got a case to make for his client against the Leafs for being misused or being verbally abused, take it up with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Don't take it up on Twitter, because in an agent's case, when he uses Twitter, it's usually just clutter.
Well, it's true. I mean, that tweet obviously went off the second he put it out there. And he was saying that it was customary in Toronto when your defense is playing poorly to blame it on the goaltender. And he kind of retracted those comments and ended up saying that, they weren't meant to be, at anyone in particular. Yeah, sure they weren't. And that he also wasn't trying to stir the pot. So an interesting storyline coming out of that. And obviously a lot of fans taking sides about it this morning. But let's move on now to one of our first Twitter questions. And Jim, people are curious about you and your hockey career, so we have to answer what the fans want to know. And okay. First up from Mitch Dahl, he says, what was your first ever hockey broadcast?
Well, Mitch, my first ever hockey broadcast was up in the north part of British Columbia. It would have been the Fort St. John Flyers against the Dawson Creek Canucks in the South Peace Hockey League, and I was picked to do that job because I worked at a radio station where the sports guy left, and I was the only person left in the building that knew a puck from a football. So I went and broadcast the hockey game. You may have meant my first NHL game, which was for a radio station in Vancouver, and it was the Vancouver Canucks against the Montreal Canadiens. Don't remember the date, and I'm not going to try too hard to remember it, but I know that it was fantastic. It was at the Montreal Forum. It was early in the season. I was young enough that I know I didn't own a suit, and that I thought the place was outstanding. And one of my best memories is that they had the most wonderful hot dogs in the world, and I could eat as many of them as I wanted in the press room and didn't have to pay a thing. The Canadiens won that night, but in those days, the Canadiens used to beat the Vancouver Canucks for fun.
It's funny the details you remember, right? It always somehow comes back to food. I'm the exact same way too with any major memories. It's like I remember that meal I had there.
Yeah.
This next one from Christian, keeping again, on the topic of your career, but Christian says he also does play-by-play in the MJHL. And what do you do to keep your voice from getting raspy and fatigued? I know that's a big issue when it comes to talking for hours on end.
Well, first of all, hello to CKDM in Dauphin, Manitoba. I would say that there's not an awful lot that I do to be really careful, to be very honest with you, and I would only be that. But mostly I would say you just look after yourself, keep your health, try not to get a cold, and keep a couple of fishermen's friends around just in case. I find the only time that I really have a problem is if I'm doing 3 games a day, like at the Olympics, and the last one seemed to be a little bit more work. And if I ever had to do games at 7 o'clock in the morning, that would be tough, but that doesn't usually happen.
So what's your trick? Do you have a big cup of water beside you? Are you a coffee guy?
Yeah, I'm a coffee guy. I'll have a few hot coffees. Everybody, any doctor, anybody who works on your throat would say that I do all of the wrong things to keep my voice prepared. But as an old theater coach used to tell me, speak from your diaphragm, don't use your throat, and you should be okay.
There we go.
I don't know what that means, but I try it.
Some good advice then from one of the best in the biz. Hey, I'll take it. But I always have to have a mug full of coffee, so I'm with you. May not be the healthiest thing, but it gets you through and it keeps you awake, right?
You got to be alert. It's not just enough to be able to talk. You have to be alert.
That's right. You have to keep your eye on that puck. Okay, so let's get back to the game then. This next one on Twitter from WG894. And he says, I know it's early, but who are your picks for the final 2 in the Stanley Cup final?
Well, I hate doing this, and usually if I'm right, I say attribute it to me. If I'm wrong, attribute it to Glenn Healy. But if we have to make the pick today, and I would say just based on the standings today and the way teams are playing, the final 2 would be, let's say, Boston, St. Louis.
Okay.
We all know that can
Not
change.
to stay with your point, man. Here's the shot by Chara. Vanek is right.
But those are 2 really good teams, East and West, right now.
Well, you know what's funny is people always want you as an expert to make this prediction and to make this guess. But it's so hard to make at this point in time. And so what I'll advise you to do, if anyone's watching right now and you're on cbcsports.ca, is just head on over to a new piece we posted this morning. And it's all about who would face who if the playoffs started today. So let's start there. We'll start with round 1, and then we'll talk about the Stanley Cup Finals as those playoffs continue. So the next question that was within that tweet was about Ryan Smith. And so Ryan is at around 386 goals right now. Do you think that Ryan Smith will achieve the 400 goal mark before he retires? Good question there, Jim.
It is a good question, and it's a hard one to answer because I have this suspicion that Ryan is not going to get a chance to get to 400 with Edmonton. So it will largely depend on whether there's a team out there that finds that they could use a guy who can kill some penalties, that may be able to get a few tip-ins on a power play when he's 39 years old and probably only playing 5 or 6 or 8 minutes a game. So I guess you'd have to look at it right now and say it's a bit of a long shot because I'm not sure if Ryan's going to be in the league next year, even though I know he wants to be.
And it's interesting you say that you just don't think there is what he needs around him to make that happen with the Oilers.
Well, it's about whether or not he's going to have employment at his age. You know, he's highly respected, but he's also in a position now where there's a lot of young guys that are taking the job and the minutes that he's going to command from somebody.
Okay, so I love this next question because I know you'll have a very interesting take, seeing as you live out on the West Coast, and while you travel every weekend, you call yourself a weekend commuter, you know what it's like in Vancouver right now with the Canucks and all the uncertainty, and fans are obviously feeling abandoned. They don't really know where the team is going from here. So Lawrence Miller says, since you covered Vancouver for years, what would turn this organization around?
Well, first of all, Lawrence, what everybody seems to want to do is fire somebody, whether it's the coach or the general manager, and I'm not sure if that's the right thing. To know that, you'd have to be inside and know who made all of the final decisions. I would say that Mike Gillis, who's the general manager and the president, his record isn't great, and he's going to have to ultimately be responsible for the record of the team, for his record of trading, and the owners will make the final decision on whether he's going to be the guy going forward. But as for the team and what they need from whoever is running it is an injection of youth, because players like the Sedins need to be pushed by good young players, just as they pushed the older players when they came up through the ranks and became the first line on the team. And right now they don't have enough, good quality young players that can take the ice time. Because there was back to the answer about your voice, the coffee's not working. Anyway, what they don't have right now are enough good young players to push, for example, the Sedins, because they're at a time in their career where they probably should be playing less and not more and still making a contribution. But I'm not sure that they have the players in their system right now that can take over and are ready to be National Hockey League players, so it might have to be through a shrewd trade or two, and that's where the ownership has to decide if Mike Gillis is the guy that's going to make those shrewd trades, and then if they don't think he is, then they'd have to make that change.
Okay, now I'm kind of tossing this question in there right now, but Roberto Luongo made 28 saves in the third period alone last night as the Florida Panthers defeated the San Jose Sharks. I do want to touch on him because, that was one of the most shocking things that happened to the Canucks this season. Do you think he's really happy in Florida?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he wants to win and has wanted to win just like anybody, but it became such a soap opera in Vancouver, and for the last couple of years he became front and center for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't necessarily because of what was happening in the goal, it was what was happening out of the goal and who was going to be there. And is he going to be the number one, or was Corey Schneider going to be the number one? And brought to a head by the fact that he didn't get to start in a big game like the Heritage Classic. So I think he's happy in the sense that all of the drama is gone, that he doesn't have to answer questions about whether he's going to be in Vancouver or not on a daily basis, and he's in a comfortable place where his family lives. And I couldn't help but thinking as I watched him in the third period of the game last night that he's back in his comfort zone. I remember when he played in Florida before, he was so good in all of those games where they gave up 50 or more shots and didn't look like they had any hope of winning. He gives them hope, and I would say that he's not just there to retire. He really does hope that that team can get better, and he can help them get better and be a playoff team.
And one of the best quotes coming out of last night was him saying that was vintage Panthers.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way it used to be for him.
Yeah, and I think, it was vintage Panthers, and it was definitely vintage Luongo. So it was good to see him have such a good, strong, sharp game with Florida. Okay, so back to these Twitter questions. This one from Otpack. How on earth do you keep up with all of the players' names game to game?
That's quite honestly the easy part for doing hockey, because while you guys are all off doing your day jobs and off at work, my job is to watch hockey games. So I sit in front of my television and my computer, and I watch 2 and 3 hockey games every day from all around the league. I make sure that I see every team so that I know not only who all the players are, but who they're playing with, what the line combinations are, what the D pairs are, and which is the shutdown pair, and which players get used in different situations, to get an idea of how teams are playing and why they're winning or why they're losing. And that's just doing research. So everybody has a function that they do in their job every day that becomes automatic. And for me, that's looking at the players. So remembering who people are and what number they wear is usually the easy part. There's a few new players every once in a while that you have to get used to, but for the most part, it's a redundancy that everybody has in their job.
And you really need to have some great eyesight, because I sit up in the press box at Leafs games and I need to have my glasses on or else I'm squinting.
Yeah, I wear mine all the time now. I don't. The vanity is gone. I have to see.
Okay, well, you're still sharp as ever, don't you worry. But I like this next question from David Petro on Twitter, because he's saying, back in the day, I love that, back in the day, you were the voice of the NHL games. No, Jim, you still are. But what have you learned from all of those years, and how have you evolved as a play-by-play announcer?
So he was probably meaning all of those EA Sports games back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was in the board game business for a long time. So for a lot of people that grew up playing EA Sports and PlayStation and things like that, I was the voice in there. And I'm not sure that I learned anything from that, except that it's one of the most tedious jobs that I've ever done. It was rewarding at the finish, but to record 750 names in about 5 different iterations is one of the most tedious things you could ever do in the basement of a big building in Burnaby in a bunker. But it was rewarding at the end, and I learned an awful lot about the technology. And so it was really an interesting job at the time, and it was quite rewarding to be out there. In fact, one time I was people in Canada knew and have known me as a broadcaster for quite some time, but in the United States, I haven't done an awful lot of games down there. So one day I was I think it was in Philadelphia, where somebody in the arena who was working with us heard my voice and looked at me and asked, "Do you do real games too?"
I love that.
From the board game.
Well, and what did you say? You said, "Yeah, I'm a real person, actually."
Yeah, I do. I'm not only the guy inside the PlayStation, but I do the real thing too.
Yeah, this is the real thing for your eyes to see. Okay, we're gonna squeeze one more question into the show here from Big Mo at Mo Jabber, because he is one of our best viewers online. So he's talking about the Oilers going right back to Edmonton. How far away do you think the Oilers are from being a playoff team?
They could be as close as next year, depending entirely on what Craig McTavish does during the summer. He said last year that he was going to be very aggressive, and I believe he has to be even more aggressive this year. He might have solved their problems in goal, although that's not automatic. We know that on a night, well, for example, last night, they can score because they have some very good still young, and now getting experienced forwards. I don't like to call those young guys anymore. But where the Oilers need to improve is that they have to be able to check, and they have to be able to defend. And so I would say that you may not be far away if the right moves are made on the blue line, if some of the young players get a lot better in a hurry, or a couple of shrewd deals are made to make sure that there's a big bomb on the power play from the blue line, and maybe a player or two who can take up half the game. You think about the best defensemen in the league, they can usually play half the game. And the Oilers don't really have anybody like that right now. And if they can get that over the summer, they might have to give up one of their best young players up front to do that. Then they can get better in a hurry.
Well, it looks like they've solved some of their problems in net, so that's a good place to start. And now just to focus on the rest of that lineup, as you were saying, try to really spark the youth that they have, because they do have so much of it. All right, Jim, thank you so much for joining us here today on Hockey Night Online and answering all of these fan questions.
It's been my pleasure, Monica.
We hope to get you back on here soon. And remember, you can continue to send us your questions and all of your comments, all of that feedback, the big stories that you're buzzing about in the online world. We'll continue to check them and bring them into the conversation right here on Hockey Night Online. I'm Monica Platek, and I'll see you tomorrow.